The torture of not knowing.
Where are they? Are they okay? Are they safe?
And all the painful possibilities.
You imagine every possible outcome.
It's a hellish existence when your lover, your friend, your child simply vanish.
It's grief, and it's ongoing grief.
Yet when bodies are found, why is it so hard to find out who they were?
For 12 years, I looked for my son, and he was in a grave, and I didn't know it.
About 600 unidentified people.
Susan Poirier.
Was it scary to have your big sister disappear?
With the nightmare for families of missing persons.
She's my role model.
There's a plan that could help.
Everybody agrees this is a really good idea.
But it's a frustrating fight to make it happen.
I just cannot believe that it hasn't been put into place.
Why aren't Canadians using forensic science to its full potential?
Nobody should have to go through what we went through.
This is CTV's W5. Here is Lloyd Robertson.
Welcome to W5. They are the faces that haunt us, the missing who vanished without a trace. Seen on milk cartons, the back of transport trucks, pinned up in public places, found at the side of the road. Each one a tragedy, seemingly without end. With desperate families hoping their missing sons or daughters will be found alive. But in many cases, they are equally prepared for the worst, knowing that as the years pass by, they may be chasing ghosts. And if they do find their loved ones, it may only be to give them a final resting place. Here is Susan Poirier.
On a lonely stretch of highway in northern Ontario, travelers are greeted by the beautiful, smiling face of Melanie Ethier. She disappeared 14 years ago. Was she abducted? Murdered? If so, who killed her? Questions that still haunt her family and her community. Her mother, Susan Ethier.
I still don't have any answers. I'm still hoping for the one person that knows what happened to come forward. It's been a long time.
What's it been like for you all this time?
It's been up and down. There's been times where bodies were found where I waited to know if it was Melanie.
It was September 1996 when the teen left a friend's house in the early morning hours. A quick 10-minute walk, but Melanie never made it home.
I called everybody I could think of in case she went to babysit somewhere or something happened. I kept on making 1,000 excuses why she wasn't coming home, because normally Mel was always at home. Then I reported her missing and the police went searching.
So this is Pine Avenue East in the town of New Liskeard, and on this street is the residence where Melanie and her friends were at.
Detective Jeff Lindsay is one of many investigators who have worked the Ethier case.
That's it right there?
They all run up against the same problem. No witnesses, no crime scene, and no body.
In the absence of any physical evidence in terms of clothing or anything else associated to Melanie directly, things can become murky.
And close to impossible for the search crews looking for Melanie in the lakes, rivers, and forests around the isolated town of New Liskeard.
It's sort of like looking for a needle in a haystack, especially at the onset of an investigation.
What do you think happened to Melanie Ethier?
Well, I think that once Melanie left the residence here on Pine Avenue on foot with the intent of getting home, that she met with some sort of foul play. There's nothing to indicate otherwise.
What leads you to believe that Melanie didn't just go off on her own, besides the fact she was 15?
Well, Melanie was a 15-year-old girl, but she was certainly connected to the community. She had a family here. Her family had been in the area for a long period of time. She had a life here and was quite happy and satisfied with it. There was no reason for her to walk away.
This is the school that I go to now.
All Susan Ethier has left of her daughter is this home video that she made the summer before she disappeared. Melanie's vibrant personality is captured on the tape.
She had lots of talent. There's nothing I think that Melanie couldn't have done. She loved dance. She had a lot of beats. Like, there's really nothing that she couldn't have done. I was always anxious to see what she would have picked as a career. She was always smiling. She was so funny, even as a little girl. She'd see somebody walk on the street and say, "Come have coffee with my mom."
At 15, Melanie was a second mother to her little sister, Jessie.
She was my role model. I always wanted to be like her.
When do your thoughts turn to Melanie?
When I see her posters. When people bring up the fact that they used to babysit her or they used to be friends with her.
How much is Melanie a part of this community still?
For a few years after she went missing, there's posters everywhere, people's windows, in all stores, and behind transports even. Now you barely see them.
Back in 1996, the community of New Liskeard rallied around the Ethier family, and Melanie quickly became everyone's child. Melanie was front page news. The local paper, the Temiskaming Speaker, called it the story of the decade.
When she first went missing, I was really busy to look for her, and my house was full of people. It was like a big, long funeral. The helicopter was going over the house. The police were at the door. The phone was ringing constantly. Like it seemed like it wasn't going to end.
We have over 700 tips in the file. There are over 500 witness statements that have been obtained. And in terms of persons of interest, we have at least 300, some of which have been definitively eliminated, some that are in various stages of investigation.
And Susan Ethier has never turned away any tip, any theory, no matter how strange.
Like, I've had a few people come to my door and tell me what their visions were. I seen a spiritualist. That was quite interesting because she described Melanie to the T. Things that nobody else should have known but me and Melanie.
Detective Jeff Lindsay says they follow up leads from psychics, but always with a degree of skepticism.
We treat any psychic tip as information, and we're duty-bound to follow up on it. The other aspect that we have to look at when we're dealing with psychic information is whether or not the person truly has a psychic ability or is wanting to provide information to police through a different means.
But as the months have turned into years, Celine has been left to search on her own and cope with small-town gossip.
I've had to go through rumors of hearing people saying that they've heard somebody say what they think happened to Melanie. At some point somebody had said she was put through a wood chipper, so I'll never have evidence. Some people say she's probably being used for a sex slave, so you'll never know.
Melanie may be missing, but she's not the only one. At any one time, 7,000 people are missing in Canada. Some want to disappear, but others are the victims of foul play.
The flip side of the missing person is the unidentified body. It's rare, but still about 600 unidentified people lie in morgues and cemeteries across the country. And one of the oldest, most gruesome and mysterious cases involves a woman whose remains are buried here in an unmarked grave in Toronto. Officially, she's known only as a number, 1654, but police call her the Nation River Lady.
In the spring of 1975, a farmer spotted a body floating in the Nation River east of Ottawa. It was a young woman, beaten and strangled to death. 35 years later, retired OPP detective Joe Pelche remembers the crime scene well.
What we saw around her neck was one of those cable TV wires that was basically tied around it. And this was over a piece of cloth, basically. And her face was partly covered. And the piece of green cloth itself, which we suspect being a curtain, was wrapped pretty well all around the body. And the hands were tied with a necktie.
Intriguing details. Police even found blood on the bridge above the Nation River.
It was human blood, but not sufficient in quantity to determine the grouping. So, because we could therefore not match that blood with hers.
The best way to identify the body was through her teeth. She had 2 unique metal bridges, but dental experts couldn't figure out where they were made.
We also checked with the armed forces because all armed forces personnel are fingerprinted. So we managed to get some fingerprints by removing the skin off her, and none of them could be matched.
Over the years, her looks have changed in the police sketches. Still, no one ever came forward to say they knew her. It's one case that still haunts Joe Pelche.
Let's face it, she was somebody's daughter, somebody's wife perhaps in the sorting. Somebody must have missed her somewhere.
A case where there's a body, but no identification. And in New Liskeard, a missing young woman, but no body. But a new tip may illuminate the 14-year-old Melanie Ethier case.
Right over here, Vine Street. Right.
For the first time, OPP Detective Jeff Lindsay and Detective Inspector Ken Leopard reveal they may have an eyewitness.
As a result of the ongoing investigation, in recent months and weeks, we've received witness information that causes us to believe that Melanie actually made it as far as the bridge that crosses the Wabi River within several hundred yards of her home.
Why does someone in a cold case file, a member of the public, hold back information for so long that could make such a difference in a case?
It could be for varying reasons. Sometimes witnesses don't realize that their small piece, what they see as a small piece of information, could be very pivotal to an ongoing investigation, particularly a historic investigation.
Just one tip, one piece of the puzzle that could lead to more clues and move this case forward. Police now believe Melanie may have been abducted near this bridge, just steps from her home.
Now that we have a concrete understanding of where she may have last been seen, it changes the perspective of the investigation and allows us to kind of go back and reevaluate historic information in the file.
And perhaps give Melanie's mother, Celine, a modicum of peace while waiting year after year.
I'd like to know what happened to her, to have some kind of justice. It doesn't feel right, just waiting and time's just dragging by.
Next,
she was dumped into the river as quickly as possible.
the struggle to uncover a killer.
It was one of those moments where your heart just stops.
And the search for answers after severed feet surface in British Columbia.
There is absolutely no indication that these people were murdered.
When CTV's W5 continues. In just a moment, one woman's unconventional quest to expose a killer.
We have a murderer who's out there.
We'll be right back.
Cold cases like the Melanie Ethier disappearance and unidentified remains like the Nation River lady are some of the toughest cases on police books. But there's a new breed of sleuths out there, like Lucia Dion, who are amateur detectives, fascinated with cracking cold cases.
I became involved because I was shocked by the number of unidentified people that we have.
She created a website, Ontario's Missing Adults, and was instrumental in helping to identify the remains of Patrick Soike, found near Lively, Ontario in 2005. There are dozens of websites like Lucia's on the internet, and they do help solve crimes. Many call themselves web sleuths, but not Lucia Dion.
I don't consider myself a detective so much as a researcher. And for me, it's about locating unconventional sources of information to advance an investigation.
Lucia is a familiar face at the National Archives in Ottawa, where she searches for that elusive detail police might have missed. Right now, her pet project is the Nation River lady, And it was here at the archives, while scanning through stacks of an old Salvation Army newspaper, The War Cry, that she stumbled upon a photo of Janice K. Roberts.
When I saw Janice's photo, I immediately thought of one of the sketches of the Nation River Lady. It was an automatic thought. And it was one of those moments where your heart just stops.
Janice K. Roberts' parents put her photo in the missing section of The War Cry.
Janice was born in 1946 in England. She emigrated to Canada in 1965. And at the time that the parents lost contact with her, she was living in the Toronto area.
Lucia's unorthodox investigation continues on the banks of the Nation River. She's meeting retired Detective Joe Pelche for the first time.
Like the body was found on or about here, approximately 150 feet from shore.
Oh, I see.
And the body was laying face down.
Can I know your theory of who she is? Or how she came to be here?
Well, I mean, the theory, my theory is that she was murdered. Then, I mean, she was wrapped up and dumped into the river as quickly as possible. There's always a possibility. We had what we call go-go girl, nude dancers in local hotels here. And she could have been one of those.
Police assumed she was a prostitute and that her body was dumped after a fight with a pimp. But Lucia isn't buying that story.
One of the things is that she had manicured nails. The other thing is her teeth. She wore dental plates, but her teeth were well cared for and they were repaired. It just strikes me as somebody who's very normal and very, I don't know what the word is, just somebody very much like, you know, your own relative.
But here's the problem. The Salvation Army records no longer exist. So Lucia is now scanning obituaries in Britain to find a connection that will lead to a living relative.
The next logical step after that would be to run a DNA sample from the Nation River Lady. Or, you know, it could be as simple as, even if the family has dental records, that could be the comparison.
Solving this mystery has become a personal quest, especially if it reveals a killer.
I find it difficult to accept that we have a murderer who's out there and who committed this act and has lived for the past 35 years free and clear. And yet there's a family that may be believing that their daughter chose to abandon them and to sever all contact. So there's a family that's suffering, and there's a victim who really does deserve justice.
Losing a loved one affects people from all walks of life, including the police.
I'm just following up on the status of that missing person investigation that we're working on.
Ontario Provincial Police Superintendent Dave Truex.
I came home Thanksgiving one year from my post-secondary studies and was greeted at the door by my mother, who indicated that an uncle of mine had disappeared on a fishing trip, and he's never been recovered to this day.
What is that like?
That question comes up probably every October of every year from my father. He gets quiet for a couple days thinking about his brother.
Insight that's very useful because he's now in charge of an OPP unit dedicated to solving cold cases of missing persons and unidentified remains.
It provides answers for them. There are folks who've lost contact for years and years and years. It provides them the what happened, the where are they okay, are they safe?
Police open up their files and photos to the public on the internet. The website was launched in 2006 with some controversy because it featured actual autopsy photos. So far, it's generated more than 1,200 tips.
The OPP has been directly involved or indirectly involved in locating 33 missing persons and 10 unidentified human remains cases.
like an unidentified man found in the Toronto area in 1993, dubbed Rusty because of a tattoo. A web sleuth helped find a match to Russell Pencil of New York.
We were able to contact the law enforcement agency that had him listed as missing, and we were able to resolve that particular previously unidentified human remains case.
The exhibits start just over the rise.
Across the country in BC, Steve Fonseca of the coroner's office heads the only other unit in the country dedicated to identifying human remains.
I think we should, probably start right at the cranium there and then...
On this day, he is conducting an exercise for forensic experts. Bones found in a forest, often discovered only by the random path of a hiker or dog walker.
It starts at the scene. It means coming out to the scene, processing that scene, obtaining as many elements and exhibits from that scene to enhance the identification. But it's once we've left that scene that our model really kicks in.
Kicks in with scientific tools like this Geographic Imaging System, or GIS. First used for map making, Fonseca has adapted GIS to track cold cases. The details of hundreds of missing people in BC are entered into a database and can be cross-referenced with cases of unidentified remains, all with the click of a mouse.
In the past, we were just reading files. You're just reading pages and pages of file information. Now I can go onto Google Earth, I can look at a dot on a map, and it means cutting down on investigative time by weeks and months.
But it's the science of DNA that is providing answers to BC's biggest mystery.
The shoe is a campus brand running shoe.
The disembodied feet that have washed ashore along the coastline, 7 in total, all wearing running shoes.
They're probably the most complex cases that we have in our inventory because we're missing the rest of that body. These are the types of cases where DNA becomes critical. We're left with very little else to make comparisons to missing people.
TV shows like CSI portray the science of DNA as sexy and simple. But scientist Dean Hildebrand says extracting DNA is complicated.
Bone samples and teeth samples, hard tissues, are difficult samples to deal with. You have to break it open mechanically somehow and extract the remnants of DNA from all the stuff that you don't need in that biological sample.
And there are 2 parts to the puzzle.
You have the DNA from the unidentified remains that are found. And that really doesn't do anything for you unless you have something to compare to. So the other side of the puzzle is the missing person's sample that goes in there.
So far, DNA has identified 2 of the feet as coming from suicide victims. But Steve Fonseca is adamant about one thing.
At this point, there is absolutely no indication that these people were murdered. When those feet do disarticulate naturally, through marine scavenging and decomposition, those shoes are buoyant.
All of the feet were in high-tech Air Soles running shoes that would naturally come to the surface.
And those shoes will float for kilometers, so they land up on a shoreline, and that's where somebody will find them.
Next,
I wanted to make sure that we could identify her.
making the most of DNA.
Does this government think this is a priority?
A move that could ease so much suffering.
That's horrifying when you get a call, bones have been found, you're waiting.
When CTV's W5 continues. In just a moment, easing the pain of chronic worry and wonder.
It's grief that doesn't go away.
We'll be right back.
Welcome back to W5. We have seen the heartbreak suffered by a family when a loved one goes missing, vanishing without a trace. And we've seen the lengths police and even amateur detectives take to try and find them, often despite the passage of years. But many families of those who are missing believe more could be done. And as you are about to see, they blame the federal government for standing in the way. Here again is Susan Poirier with Chasing Ghosts.
Judy Peterson has navigated some turbulent waters in the past 17 years. It was August 1993 when her 14-year-old daughter, Lindsay, vanished. Lindsay was living in the Comox Valley area of Vancouver Island. She was last seen walking down this road and might have been hitchhiking when she disappeared.
We had recently moved from Vancouver to Courtenay area, and she wanted to be in Vancouver, and she had run away a few months before that.
Was there anything that you found that made you think that Lindsay hadn't run away?
Yes, when she had run away to Vancouver before, she packed a backpack. She took, a coat and her clothes and her special things and her teddy bear, Snowflake, that her grandma and grandpa had given to her. The first time she left me a really nice note. This time there was just nothing. She had no money, no coat, we couldn't find any clue that said that she was planning on leaving.
Kim Nichols, now 28, was 11 when Sister Lindsay disappeared.
I remember it was very serious once missing children came in and started doing the missing posters and stuff.
Was it scary to have your big sister disappear? Do you remember being scared?
Oh yeah, you go through every emotion. Like, it's not just scared. I mean, you're sad, you're angry. I think one thing that my parents have is guilt. And that's one emotion that I don't have, so.
What do you think happened to Lindsay?
You imagine every possible outcome. I get to have my little 11-year-old thought that maybe she's down in Mexico or something.
I believe that she was taken that very first day. As much as part of my mind will not stop hoping, I also have a hard time thinking that if she was out there, that she wouldn't contact us.
If Lindsay did meet an awful end on this country road, her mother thinks a DNA match may be the best way to find Lindsay.
When Lindsay had been missing about 5 or 6 years, I contacted the RCMP and I told them that I wanted to get my DNA in the data bank because I wanted to make sure that my DNA or her DNA was in there so that we could identify her.
Police across the country identify suspects using the DNA data bank in Ottawa. It could be expanded to cross-reference missing persons and unidentified human remains.
When they told me that it didn't exist, I was horrified because I was so afraid that she could be anywhere across Canada or even in the States, and all for years, and I wouldn't have known.
Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Highlands.
Politicians agree.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to introduce my private member's bill, which will amend the DNA Identification Act to include DNA samples from missing persons.
Judy Peterson lobbied Conservative MP Gary Lunn, who called the private member's bill Lindsay's Law, but it died in the House. But police chiefs from across the country are pushing ahead with their own strategy. OPP Superintendent Dave Truax.
What tools could police use to better the search for missing people and connecting the dots to unidentified remains?
What we want to do is make sure that all of that information is interfaced in one way, shape, or form in order that we can, on the stroke of a key on a keyboard, be able to conduct that search across the country to ensure that there isn't a similar or matching case that gets missed.
And victim organizations think it's a good idea, too. Steve Sullivan is the former federal ombudsman for the victims of crime.
This is one of those rare issues, I think, that really is beyond politics. All of the federal parties agree this is a good idea. Law enforcement supports the idea. Provinces support the idea. Everybody agrees this is a really good idea.
But still, the federal government has failed to pass legislation to expand the DNA data bank to include the missing and unidentified human remains.
It really is coming down to, does this government think this is a priority? Is it a priority of this government to help families like Judy Peterson find some comfort in knowing whether her daughter is actually out there or not? It comes to political will, and at this point, we haven't seen that kind of political will.
But in the United States, finding the missing is a priority, and Fort Worth, Texas is at the cutting edge of DNA science.
While the push for the Canadian government to establish a DNA databank for missing persons appears to be going nowhere, south of the border, the Lone Star State of Texas has had one for years. Here at the University of North Texas, the U.S. National DNA Databank provides answers searching families desperately seek.
Nobody should have to go through what we went through. Even if the answer is bad, at least you have an answer.
Teresa Freitas has lived the nightmare. Her 21-year-old son, Jacob Witt, disappeared 12 years ago. Jacob had traveled to Texas to work. One day, calls home to mom in Florida just stopped.
As time went on, I started getting a real uneasy feeling, but this may sound terrible. Some people say, oh, I knew when it happened. I didn't know. I honestly didn't have the feeling at that time. I knew something wasn't right, but it just never entered my mind.
And what do you know about what happened to Jacob as far as he was working and...
In the beginning, all we knew was he was working and he left work, and from what we were told, no one's seen him again. We don't know if when he walked out of the store he was accosted or when he went to where he lived. All we do know is there's nothing of him, nowhere. No ID, no belongings, no clothing, absolutely nothing of his. And we have no idea what happened to it. We just know that it was just wiped out.
For 12 long years, Teresa and her family waited to hear from Jacob.
Every time remains were found, I'd sit there waiting. That's horrifying, and there's many people right now going through that. That's horrifying when you get a call, bones have been found, you're waiting, and then you're told it's not your family member.
For Judy Peterson, who lost her daughter Lindsay, the personal cost of living with waiting and wondering never goes away.
It's like dealing with a chronic illness. You don't have any choice. It doesn't get easy ever, and it's grief, and it's ongoing grief, and it's grief that doesn't go away.
Next,
please, don't let another day go by that you don't do this.
Begging for action.
We need some political will.
Is the federal government prepared to help families find their missing loved ones?
Well, you'd have to ask the minister responsible for that.
When CTV's W5 continues. In just a moment, finally, answers for one grieving mother.
How are we supposed to know?
We'll be right back.
For years, a John Doe has been buried and forgotten in the Southland Cemetery in Grand Prairie, Texas. It wasn't until June of 2010 that he was finally identified as Jacob Witt of Dundee, Florida. His mother, Teresa Freitas.
They found his remains in a sleeping bag in a wooded area. And there was some items there. It wasn't personal items, wasn't anything that could tell them who he was, okay?
He had no ID?
Nothing. There wasn't even a penny in his pocket. Absolutely nothing. No money, no ID, nothing.
The answer finally came at the University of North Texas when police entered Jacob's DNA and a match was made to his mother.
Yeah, see, the more I see that, to me, there's something co-purifying with your sample.
Dr. Bruce Badoli of the Texas DNA Center says there are an estimated 40,000 unidentified remains and 100,000 people missing in the United States.
To me, missing persons is like a mass disaster over time. The only reason people don't know about it is because it doesn't happen at one time. It's one person here, one person there, so it's lost in the noise and not given the seriousness that it needs to be addressed given the magnitude of the problem. It's at least 10 times worse than anything that happened in the World Trade Center.
Since 2003, the databank has matched 500 missing people and unidentified remains. In 2010 alone, 83 cases were solved. One of them was Jacob Witt.
June 23rd, 2010, I received a phone call telling me that my DNA had matched their John Doe DNA, a John Doe they had had for 12 years. So for 12 years, I looked for my son, and he was in a grave. and I didn't know it.
A tragic journey follows. Teresa, Jacob's brother Jesse, and stepfather Albert drive 1,200 kilometers from Florida to Texas to see Jacob's grave for the first time. It's not what they expected. At the Southland Cemetery, they're in for a nasty surprise. With no family to bury him, Jacob's grave is utterly invisible. No marker, just a patch of grass.
Right here.
Right here?
Right here. This is where he is.
You're supposed to be there.
I don't know.
Fresh pain is added to the family's endless grief.
There's nothing there. Absolutely nothing there.
How are we supposed to know?
I don't know, Mother.
Like he didn't even exist. That's the first thought when I walked up. It was like he didn't even exist. You know, I just think somebody should show some respect to the dead a little more than that. You know, he went to work every day. He was a productive citizen. Why would you not at least put a number on his, you know, some kind of a marker, something? So, I don't know.
A sad reunion for this family, but Teresa is grateful that DNA allowed some kind of resolution.
If it was not for this DNA, right now, I would still be sitting in my home, wondering where my son is, and he would still be laying in a pauper's grave in Ellis County, Texas. Forever.
If you had the Canadian authorities in front of you who are trying to develop a system to match missing people and unidentified remains, what would you say to them?
I would get on my hands and knees and beg them. For all the parents that don't have a voice, for all the loved ones that have passed away and don't have a voice, I would beg them. And I would do it with no shame. Please, don't let another day go by that you don't do this.
Back in BC, Judy Peterson keeps up her search for daughter Lindsay and her 7-year campaign to change the DNA databank. But putting up posters on the ferry can never achieve what a DNA match can.
Thanks a lot, Phil. That's great. Okay, thanks. The RCMP are in support of it. Searching organizations such as Missing Children, the coroner's office, the politicians seem to be in favor of it.
But the government continues to spin its wheels in internal committees. They can't agree on a definition of what constitutes a missing person.
I'm shocked because after 7 years of meetings, if they can't figure that out, pick a definition of what is a missing person. The software exists already. The indexes are all there. All they have to be is enabled and loaded. So we need some political will for somebody to say, make this happen. And I'm hoping that Vic Taves, the new public safety minister, will take this on and make it happen.
When we are the government of Canada, the next...
W5 asked Vic Taves, the hardline law and order minister of public safety, for an interview, but his office said he was too busy. Instead, his ministry sent W5 an email that said, "Our current priority is to stabilize the existing DNA regime." We caught up with Vic Taves at a Toronto news conference.
Minister Taves.
Good morning. How are you?
Hi, Susan Poirier from W5. Minister, why hasn't your government moved on a missing persons index for the National DNA Data Bank, sir?
Well, you'd have to ask the minister responsible for that.
Vic Taves is the minister responsible. He even sent Judy Peterson a letter a week prior saying he was too busy to meet with her too, but that he's working to ensure safety of all Canadians. After the news conference, Vic Taves apparently realized he is the minister responsible and he would talk to W5.
All right. Minister, it is a matter of public safety.
searching families like Judy Peterson, they want some answers. When is the government going to move on this legislation?
Well, in fact, this is an issue that my colleagues are working on with me. And in respect of the issue of the DNA data bank for missing women, what we have indicated is that there is money available to develop a particular program. Again, as I indicate, my colleagues are working on that particular issue. In the meantime, from a legislative point of view, we have numerous bills before the House of Commons dealing with DNA and the strengthening of the sex offender registry.
But you're talking about the sex offender registry. We're talking about a data bank to connect.
No, I'm talking about the DNA. I'm talking about the DNA database, that 50% of the individuals who should have been registered are not registered.
But we're talking about connecting the dots between missing people and unidentified remains.
And we are taking steps as no government has ever taken steps. Certainly the prior government simply refused to look into that issue. My colleagues are looking at that matter. I know that in the budget there was $10 million put aside, and we will look at that. In terms of legislation, I can't comment on that, but there's never been a government who's been more concerned about the excuse me, the rights of victims as opposed to the interests of criminals.
Can you just one more question, sir? A timeline, sir.
A lot of talk, but no clear answers from Vic Taves.
It's just unbelievable how slow government and legislation works. If Lindsay was abducted and killed, her murderer is still out there. And, you know, it's a public safety issue, and I just cannot believe that it hasn't been put into place. Maybe we'll go out on the boat on Sunday.
The loss of Lindsay has tightened the bond between Judy and her younger daughter, Kim Nichols. But the emotional cost is high.
I guess what people don't understand is that it's ongoing. It'll come up to her birthday in September, and then we have Christmas, and then there's New Year's, and then there's my mom's birthday, and then my birthday, and then Mother's Day. So it just goes on and on and on, and it's never ending.
Do you see an end? What would end it?
I believe that's what this DNA data bank will bring, is closure to not only our family, but other families as well.
And in New Liskeard, Ontario, Celine Ethier hopes DNA can help find her missing daughter, Melanie.
I think that would be great. I think it should be everywhere.
Celine Ethier had some good news this year. The birth of a grandson, 6-month-old Tyrone.
There's a little dragonfly.
Yeah, I'm gonna look at that. Well, I think my poor little grandchild's gonna have a very worried grandma. I'm probably gonna be overly protective.
And Jessie Ethier understands more deeply her own mother's pain and loss.
It made me realize what kind of feelings my mom would have had the day my sister went missing. Because you don't know what love is until you have a baby. And I can't even imagine losing my son.
He is filling a big gap. He makes me very happy every time I see him.
Some joy.
Yeah, a lot of joy. Yeah, although to have Melanie there would sure have made it complete.
The legislation that would create a database of DNA from families of the missing and of unidentified remains, dubbed Lindsay's Law, was introduced in Parliament twice. Each time, the private members' bills failed to get enough support. And last June, a Senate committee recommended the DNA database be created. So far, the federal government's only response has been to say it's under study. W5 will be right back. And that is W5 for this week. Remember, you can also find us online at w5.ctv.ca. There you can learn more about our stories, watch them again, and contact us via email. You can also follow us on Twitter, and of course, we'd love to hear from you. Until next week, on behalf of all of us, I'm Lloyd Robertson. Thank you for watching.